so people can start filing in. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of CrimCon. We are very excited to go through another day of really incredible research. I'm going to be moderating stream 2 all day today. So I'm looking forward to hanging out with everybody. For our presentations this morning, I would ask that you post any questions that you have in the Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Our panelists are happy to address any questions that you have about their work. We'll save that for the end. We have 3 papers this morning, but I'm still going to ask everybody to abide by the 10-minute time limit, just so we have as much time for discussion afterwards. So that said, we will start with our first paper today, which is Playing with Gender, Femininities and Masculinities of Girls in Gangs. Ellen, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Okay. Okay. Hi, good morning, and thank you very much, Andy and the whole team of CrimCon for organizing this conference and for making it accessible for everyone. My name is Ellen van Damme. I've just finished my PhD on the position and role of women in and around gangs in Honduras. And what I'm going to present today is based on a paper I'm writing for a special issue, so all comments, suggestions are welcome. Before going into my data, I want to highlight a few theoretical concepts and points of discussion regarding femininities and masculinities in gangs. To start with, according to Hume and Wilding, femininities and masculinities in the gang are often constructed as being the opposite of the other gang. The masculinity of a gang member is claimed via domination or so-called aggressive sexuality, and extreme violence, such as the ruthless killing of a rival gang member to reinforce one's own position within the gang. Moreover, Peterson argued that the gender oppression and sexual double standards present in society are often amplified in the gang context, where masculinities play out and intersect with a female gang experience. I would agree that it is not the gang as such that is uniquely machoistic. The gender roles and subsequent double standards are being played out in the patriarchal society within which the youngsters grow up. And finally, Valdez argued in his study on Mexican-American gang girls that girls who are being raped are blamed for their own victimization because they allegedly violated the ideological expectation of femininity in that they were unable to practice so-called restraint from excessive drug and alcohol use and sex. Furthermore, it has been argued that gangs are an exteriorization of so-called hypermasculinization, which is expressed via their looks, clothes, tattoos, and the harsh initiation rites. Also, Valdez argued that adolescent females are prey for male adolescents and older adults in a street culture that promotes hypermasculinity, sexual conquest, sexual aggression, and sexual objectification of women. And due to this hypermasculinity, there seems to be no space for women who want to express their femininity within the gang. But on the contrary, women gang members tend to suppress their femininity, incorporating traditional alpha male attributes, such as aggressiveness and power-based relationships. And also according to research on gang membership in Medellin, Colombia, where girls in Baird's study only rarely became active gang members, the girls had to adapt themselves to the hegemonic masculine world of the gang, as the girls are obliged to go through a process of masculinization to successfully negotiate gang patriarchy. Subsequently, the female gang member becomes a so-called hyper-masculinized woman. So in line with these narratives, it seems that female gang members cannot be feminine. Hence, the question is, to what extent are the concepts masculinity and femininity generalizable within a gang and within society? Are these concepts too rigidly defined? In my opinion, the concepts can be very differently conceptualized, depending on the country, culture, group structure, and circumstances. Indeed, the discussion whether female gang members perform so-called bad girl femininity or adapt to the masculine gang standards remains relevant. Moreover, we should be careful with the simplistic categorization of female gang members as either feminine sex objects or masculine tomboys. Hence, Susan Batchelor rightly cautioned to be critical towards these stereotypes by saying that given that issues of identity are inextricably linked to issues of power, young women's investment in gender stereotypical discourses can be read as the complex outcome of a gender hierarchy that celebrates males and masculinity and devalues females and femininity. The flip side of this, of course, is that such young women lack ways to gain status and rewards on their own terms. Regarding femininity and masculinity in Latin America, then, Baird argued that we should be careful not to oversimplify or stereotype male identity, and we should rightly speak of masculinities and not masculinity. However, the most common and somewhat exaggerated version of hegemonic masculinity across Latin America is defined by the notion of machismo, the visible symbols of which are male displays of wealth, sexual conquest, and power over others. Machismo, indeed, is often equalized to patriarchal masculinity. At the same time, Hume and Wilding rightly point out that one should be careful by stereotyping young men in urban marginalized communities, because by drawing causal links between urban poverty, status frustration, and violence, one risks to portray all violence on marginalized young men and ignore violence perpetrated by non-marginalized men. This is what Hume and Wilding refer to as the pool of the stereotypes related to extreme forms of masculinities, which is not only enforced by public opinion and the media, but also by researchers themselves. Next, I will discuss some of my data to show how these issues of femininities and masculinities play out within my study on women in and around gangs in Honduras, and why I argue that we should rather speak of a continuum of masculinity and femininity, whereby women try to maneuver around these gender stereotypes. To start with, the way femininities and masculinities are constructed are also highly influenced by the patriarchal society, where the macho culture dominates and where there is an underlying agreement of male entitlement over women. As such, differences are made between the so-called weaker and stronger sexes. In line with this, femininities are linked to softer characteristics, including beauty, obedience, dedication to the family and household, and so on. Masculinities, by contrast, are linked to harder characteristics, including physical strength, dominance, supporting the family, and so on. Even though the latter, supporting the family, most of the time was fulfilled by women, as the patriarchy is often absent from the household. When in society, masculinity is equalized to power and femininity to weakness and subordination to male authority, children from a young age internalize these standards. According to a female teacher I interviewed, boys in her classroom aspire to become hitmen and hence earn a lot of money, supposedly, while girls have more conventional aspirations related to their feminine roles as caregivers. Boys growing up in these gang-controlled zones perceive the gang fantasy as a way to acquire a certain masculine position in society by owning a car and money, and hence being able to maintain a wife and family. On the other hand, women trying to escape from this get in conflict with these traditional forms of masculinities and femininities. According to the study of a former female gang leader I interviewed, and which I call Jennifer, she perceived herself as being very attractive as an adolescent, as she was, according to her own words, the temptation of the neighborhood. While at the same time, she described herself as very tomboyish, referring to the fact that she had better relationships with boys than with girls. In her view, being a girl or woman equals fragility and not being able to support or protect the family. As narrated by Jennifer, girls and women often experienced feelings of injustice and powerlessness due to the feminine characteristics ascribed to their gender. Even though in practice most women took care of their own household, there was still this image that it was up to a man to take care of them, although the violence they suffered was at the hands of these same men. These traditional perspectives on femininities and masculinities, which are rooted within society, also influence a rigid way of assigning gender roles. Moreover, in society, and this is even more strongly pronounced within the gang, male standards are favored and imposed over men as well as women. So, as shown in this quote of Jocelyn, women in gangs do not only need to adhere to their traditionally perceived female roles, but also to male roles, which are set as standards in order to be taken seriously or respected. Indeed, as narrated by Jocelyn, girls' and women's femininity is bound with notions of fragility and the alleged need for men to protect and support them. Although in reality, most girls and women in my study grew up in female-headed households or are single mothers themselves. This brings me to the suggestion to not perceive femininity or femininities and masculinity or masculinities as two opposing ways of defining and constructing one's gender and positionality, but rather as a more fluid construction. As my data show, girls and women dynamically move between the notions of femininity and masculinities, depending on the situation and the context. And finally, I give an example of what I analyzed together with my colleague, William Carballo, in a chapter we recently published. The same female gang member we analyzed in a couple of articles was portrayed differently in the media depending on the occasion. Once she was dressed and labeled as very feminine when she was arrested while extorting and hence wanted to keep a low profile.
Ellen, you have 1 minute left.
Yeah. And another time she was dressed and labeled as very masculine when she was being transferred between prisons and wanted to make clear to which gang she belonged. Society mobilizes limited labels for women, such as good feminine mothers and housewives, or bad sexually promiscuous whores. Likewise, in the gangs, even though literature tends to divide female gang members into sexist categories on the lines of being a good feminine or a bad masculine woman, my data suggests that female gang members move dynamically between these different poles on the fluid continuum of masculinity and femininity. Thank you very much, and all comments are welcome.
All right, thank you so much. Our next paper is Prison Labor and Strip Searches. Alexis, whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm Alexis, and today I'll tell you a little bit about prison labor and strip searches in Quebec prisons. So in the current context, there's been a lot of mobilizations around Black Lives Matter and defunding the police worldwide in the past 6 months, as well as a second Me Too wave in Quebec and mobilizations to get people out of prison due to the pandemic worldwide as well. To me, that speaks to abolitionist themes. So what is abolitionism? It's theory and praxis that aims to eliminate oppressive institutions and to rethink responsibility, support, and safety, and as well as focusing on building community. Abolition is often criticized as being idealistic or utopic, which is why I focus on praxis. For instance, reforms that aim to reduce reliance on harmful practices. In this presentation, I propose an abolitionist analysis of correctional law in Quebec, the Loi sur le système correctionnel du Québec, or LSCQ. I emphasize praxis as well as gender and race. Why this specific case? Well, in Quebec, women are underrepresented in prison, which is fine. But there's a problem with Indigenous women's representation in prisons. So although their demographic weight in the general population is less than 2%, they are about 10% of the women jail population. So that's extremely high and worrisome. Furthermore, there are problems with living condition in jails for women in Quebec. So in one of them, since the past 4 years, the Ombudsman has been decrying the conditions, and there's even been an injunction request against the prison, which was denied last year. This prison remains in use to this day. So in this presentation, I start from the context put forth in the current mobilizations, so systemic racism and problems of sexual violence. And I focus on gendered and racial problems with incarceration from a socio-historical point of view. So this is why I focus on prison labor and strip searches. I put forth relevance to current correctional law in these two themes and discuss practical consequences of poor framing of prison labor and strip searches in the LSCQ, as well as discussing tangible abolitionist reforms that could be implemented. So for prison labor, historically prison labor is an important issue because it has been linked to as historical continuity with racism, slavery, and colonialism. So the fact that mass incarceration today has an overrepresentation of Black people, people of color, Indigenous people, is understood as a way to maintain systemic racism and to even get some cheap labor done by paying people very little, which serves the prison industrial complex. Sexism, racism, and classism are also entwined in prison labor because historically, programs in prison aim to refeminize women by training them to be good little servants once they get out of prison, so domesticity training. What about right now in the LSCQ? Well, right now, people who work in prison, in jails, are paid 35% of minimum wage, and after this 35% chop, 10% are also removed to go fund activities and programs. The rest is split in two. So for each hour of labor, a person is paid less than $2 an hour. That goes to their commissary allowance, and $2 an hour go into a trust account, which is made available to the person once they're released from jail. What does this mean for women? Well, on average, women have about 16 hours of work per job weekly, which represents $32 per week, which are readily available to women, and $129 per month. So this is a problem because in prison, cost of life is extremely expensive. So commissary costs a lot, and if you have small wages and a small commissary allowance, that means you can't really purchase adequate menstrual products. So there's a problem with meager wages, which aren't easy to compensate within jails, because in Quebec, if you're incarcerated, you're not eligible for welfare. And most people in prison come from marginalized backgrounds. So that means that they can't necessarily turn to family to ask, excuse me, can you give me a little money so I can buy tampons and whatnot? This matters because it may lead to differential quality of life in prison and to dangerous solutions to menstruation. So there's this example of women in a French prison who, because they didn't have proper menstrual products, they would chop off the top of a water bottle and use that as a menstrual cup, which sounds very dangerous if you ask me. Also, what do you do once you're released if all you've saved of your month of incarceration is $129? And how do you take care of your kids? How do you even get a job since you have a criminal record? And how do you provide for yourself and your family if we consider gender and racial wage gaps, which persist in Canada to this day? So a concrete way of reframing these problems with correctional law as pertains to prison labor and wages is to pay minimum wage for minimum wage labor and to offer worker protections, to use the funds transparently and only put people's wages in a trust account if they consent, and also to limit commissary prison profits to 10%, which is what is done in the federal system in Canada, and also to freely provide access to menstrual products without rations. And now for strip searches. So strip searches are relevant in the prison context because they are experienced as state-sanctioned sexual assault. So a huge proportion of women have been victimized prior to incarceration, and it's even for Indigenous women. So about 90% of Indigenous women who are incarcerated have been victimized in the past. And there's also the issue that strip searches may be used by correctional officers to camouflage rape or other forms of sexual violences. There's also historical continuity with colonialism and systemic racism because sexual assault was historically used to ensure women's compliance and subservience to these harmful structural violences. In Quebec jails, we know that there are problems with strip searches because of the injunction request I spoke about earlier. So some women report being strip searched in front of other people, and one even remained naked for multiple minutes. To me, that might be because of the framing of strip searches in the LSCQ. So the LSCQ allows for strip searches conducted in routine circumstances. For instance, you're just going from your cell to your job, or in non-routine situations. So For instance, if they believe a crime might have been committed in prison or something. For some of the strip searches, so that's that a person in similar circumstances would interpret the risk similarly. So they need reasonable grounds to conduct a strip search if they believe a weapon is hidden, for example, but they don't need reasonable grounds to conduct a strip search if there's a situation that's more dangerous, like a hostage or a riot or something like that. A strip search must be authorized by a manager if it's non-routine, but if it's routine, it doesn't need to be. And if there's an emergency, no authorization is required. And women are supposed to be the ones who search women unless there's an emergency as well. The problem with this is that it leaves a lot of space for discretion. So this is a problem because, as we know, policing, prisons, etc., often has a lot of problems in terms of discrimination. So racial profiling of Black and Indigenous women of color. And as we know, Asians are overrepresented in prison. So some ways to address these problems is to frame strip searches as a last resort and to completely ban routine strip searches, because anyways, they're not even supposed to exist per Canadian legal doctrine. Also to remove items and put them on before removing the next item and so on, to be that the person strip searched be shielded from the camera with a screen or something, but that the guard remain visible to the camera, and that someone of the same gender is always the one conducted a strip search with the supervisor's authorization as well as the searched person's consent. Argue that the grounds to conduct a strip search need to be redefined. So the potential gendered, racial, social, psychological, and physical harms caused by strip searches must be taken into account, and they must be balanced out. They must be great that's prevented by the strip search. So the new question for grounds to conduct strip searches would be, is sexually assaulting someone justifiable given the circumstances I am attempting to prevent? And in most cases, the answer should be no. So in conclusion, abolitionist praxis means looking at the past to inform decisions about and even understanding of the present, and then inform changes for the future, and with long-term goals of building community and having a more humane approach to everything, basically. So thank you so much for listening. You can contact me.
All right. Thank you, Alexis. Our last paper, Sandra, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I'm trying to share my screen. Okay, I think it's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay, so give me 1 second. Okay, so first of all, good morning. Thank you so much for this activity, and thank you so much for counting on me to participate here today. My name is Sandra López Zubiría Díaz. I'm a criminologist and I'm a professor here in Madrid at Rey Juan Carlos University. That's why I need to apologize, because after this presentation I have classes, so maybe I need to leave the room early. I'm not sure, but it depends on the questions. And first of all, I would like to apologize because my mother tongue is Spanish, and as you know, we are not so good at languages. My English level is not so high, so I'm sorry for this. Here I want to introduce different conclusions of a study framing a project related to terrorism. This is a presentation called "What to Do with Women of Díaz: The Need for an Urgent Response." As I said, I'm a professor here at University, and I'm very interested in gender studies. My PhD was related to gender violence, so nowadays I keep going in this field, and I try to complete different studies with this gender perspective. So the first thing I would like to highlight is the importance of the gender perspective in every field. research forgets women as objects of study in the field of terms, and this thing can be extended to other fields. For example, in my studies in criminology, the initial studies of criminology, female offenders were understood as abnormal subjects just because these women that commit different crimes were not exactly like the typical women with these roles and stereotypes. So this is a problem. Here in jihadist terms related to this group, this organization, the Daesh, offers more prominence to women. But in this field, we need to ask different questions. In this case, I would like to debate about if is there real change of roles in the Daesh related to women, or we are just seeing the maintaining of traditional roles. Well, there are examples of women's violent involvement in terms, not only in jihadist terms. Maybe, for example, we can see in anarchist terms in this kind of groups. We have more examples, not just now in the Daesh organization. But sometimes women are used as an instrument because it's easier to attack, and well, they have more media influence, and this is really important in this kind of groups, in this kind of terms. Of course, in general, we have more male involvement, but we need to pay attention to the participation of women. If we pay attention in this Alcanzat brigade, like it's a kind of moral police in this context of the Daesh, of this group of terrorists, they maintain the stereotypes of women. They say that women are mother and they are wives. So we don't see exactly a violent fighting in this context. Maybe sometimes, maybe with some exception, but usually they maintain this stereotype. So this idea of women fighting, women with weapons, and this kind of idea in general that we can see in the media is not really true, because the idea of this Alcanzas brigade, the idea inside of these terms is the maintaining of these stereotypes of mother and wife in general. But it is true that we have a new related to the role inside of this organization related to women, that it's women play a key role in recruitment. About the motivation and the possibility of violence related to women, we should deny the idea of the only one motivation related to this romantic idea, like women like girlfriends of the Mujahideen, or this idea linked with this romantic idea of the women in the terms. We have different motivation, like to be a good Muslim, this concept of membership, this idea of sisterhood. So there is not only one motivation, and this is important. We need to pay attention to focus on the different motivation because it's super necessary to the prevention and the treatment in this case. Because I don't have enough time, and this is a really big topic, well, like the rest of the papers, I'll try to be fast, and I only want to share with you the conclusions of a study in this frame related to the different condemned sentences in Spain for jihadist terrorists, in this case only talking about women. Between 2015 and 2020, we only have, well, we have 17 women sentences in Spain for jihadist terrorists. And maybe this is not, well, it's not a big number, but until 2014, there were no women convicted of jihadist terrorism. So I think this is an important data. The main fact, the conviction is because the use of social networks and communication channels, they glorify terrorism, they justify violence, they encourage radicalization and recruitment. So in this case, we can see that they don't perform violence acts, at least in our, well, in my country, at least in Spain, at least in these sentences. So we can't deny this idea of women like new important facts related to the violence or the facting, because in this case we can see they maintain their general roles, and we can see this new related to the roles and the positions, but only linked with this idea of radicalization and recruitment, but not linked with this idea of violence. The main thing I would like to highlight in this presentation linked with this, well, the whole study, the whole research about women in Díaz, it's what to do with women nowadays, what we do with children especially. The end of the caliphate was in March in 2019, and nowadays we have thousands of people in the fields in northern Syria and Iraq. And nowadays they are suffering important rights violations because they are suffering sexual violence, they are suffering disease, and they are in the really well, not good conditions for a human being. Even if you are a criminal, you need to have the minimum rights. The governments are reluctant to act even with children's, maybe because of the fear of possible future acts by women and children raised in this context. And in this case, okay, we can see women have decided to go to Syria, but in the end, many have been victims of violence, especially sexual violence as well. So we need to do something. We can't say, okay, you are here, you are there in these fields, and that's all because you are a risk for my country. We can't do that, especially with minors, because minors have not made any decision. And just a few ideas, well, to conclude this presentation. In general, it's necessary to promote research with a gender perspective, because if not, we won't get an adequate treatment in any case. On women's roles, there is no unanimity within jihadist terrorists. Traditional roles are maintained, as we can see, but also importance is given to women in some tasks. For example, in this case, related to the recruitment. On the situation of minors, the governments must act immediately. We don't have any excuse in this case. They didn't have any choice. But we must also act on women who are condemned by the facts, but not relegated to openly in the context of violence and uncertainty, which will create a greater threat to our security. So I think I'm in time. Thank you so much. And if you have any question, please do not hesitate to contact to me. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for your wonderful presentations. If anybody in attendance has questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to type those into the Q&A box. We do have one question so far for you, Alexis. They ask, how do you think the Me Too movement specifically can influence structural change in the prison system, especially when it comes to historically underrepresented and marginalized groups like Indigenous women?
Hi, thanks for your question. That's very interesting. I think that for the Me Too movement, especially, the critique that the justice system isn't adapted to victims of sexual violence is very strong. It's like a very important aspect of the Me Too movement, how police aren't equipped to react and how courts aren't really, the ways that decisions are made when, as pertains to victims of sexual violence, doesn't advantage victims. And I think it ties in as well to for women who commit crimes, because as some of you may know, a lot of crimes committed by women are mostly about survival. So the like stealing to feed your kids, fraud to welfare instances, reacting to violence by either a partner or a family member. So having this wider lens that ties in with the Me Too movement and the other mobilizations I mentioned allows us to see that everything is connected together. All these systems of oppression are connected together, and we can't think of solutions without having this wider lens of how a lot of the aspects of our justice system don't actually advantage the people who are most affected by the system, and how I'm kind of rambling, sorry, but I think it's, oh, I can't see the question anymore. I wanted to go back.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can read it again if you want me to.
Oh yes, please, thanks.
So I want to wrote, how do you think the Me Too movement specifically can influence structural change in the prison system, especially when it comes to historically underrepresented and marginalized groups like Indigenous women?
Yeah, so I think maybe just having the conscience that people who are incarcerated in women's prisons have experienced, most of them have experienced sexual violence at one point or another in their lives, especially Indigenous women. So if we want to think of better ways to react to punishment in general, but also within the prison system, we have to center these experiences. And so although the Me Too movement is a lot about like cis women's experiences of sexual victimization, and often the voices that are most listened to or heard are those of white women and richer women, we need to think of the people who are systematically disadvantaged like throughout social strata. So I hope that answers your question. We can chat about it more if you'd like. Maybe I'll have a better answer.
Everyone, Sandra has to leave for class. So thank you, Sandra, for participating today. Have a good class.
Thank you so much, and I'm really sorry, Andy.
No, it's okay. Nope.
Okay.
You do what you have
have my mail, so please no hesitate. I'm here for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So Ellen, you had a question that you wanted to ask. So.
Hi. Yeah. Well, actually, my question was for Sandra, but
Oh, no.
I see she. Yeah, it's no problem. I mean, I can maybe just pose it as a way of raising the discussion, because I found it really interesting what she was saying about how the stereotypes are maintained among the women. Because I see some parallels with women and gangs, and I was wondering if this might also evolve, because historically, women in gangs here in Central America also, and still upon today, like maintain their traditional roles of mothers and wives, taking care of male prisoners, taking care of male gang members, and so forth. But what we saw was like over the years, and now I'm speaking of a period like the gangs here in Central America, the Mara Salvatrucha and the Barrio 18, started in the 1990s, so I'm speaking of roughly 30 years. That they have evolved because like male gang leaders have been locked up. So eventually what happened was like women taking over those roles because the men would trust their own wives often more than other male gang members. So yeah, maybe I just wanted to pose that to see like if also with IS or Dash, this might evolve. I'm not a terrorist expert, and I'm also not saying that terrorist groups and gangs are similar, but I just found it interesting to make these comparisons. And yeah, maybe somebody from the public wants to raise something about that. Thank you.
Yeah, if anybody has anything that you want to contribute to that in chat, please do. I'm certainly not an expert. I can't speak to that. And if anybody does have any questions for Sandra, you can message those to me. I can give you her email address. She's volunteered that. If anybody wants to pose anything for her. But seeing nothing, I forgot to mention at the top of the stream that stream 2 today is sponsored by Southern Illinois University Press. So please go check them out. If anybody has any questions, Going once, going twice. It sounds like we're done. Thank you, Ellen and Sandra and Alexis, for coming out today. Thank you for everybody in attendance for spending time with CrimCon. Hey, if you're planning on sticking around this stream for our next session, I have to shut it down for recording purposes. So it'll be back live around 10 a.m. Eastern time. And yeah, Ellen, I will send you that right now. So
thank you very much for organizing this.
I'm happy to.
You've done amazing work.
This has been the greatest experience of my career. Like I have realized that I mean I got kind of burned out on the publisher parish life, but I love promoting other people's stuff, and through the conferencing or through the podcast stuff that I do on the side, it's a genuine joy to be able to hype people's stuff. So I'm looking forward to a lot of future CrimCon events.
That's amazing. I must say, I mean, I was able to follow because I am from Belgium, so time-wise it doesn't always work, but I'm right now in Honduras. So again, I mean, if it would have been in the US, I would have not been able, but like everybody can follow, as you said, so that's amazing.
And we're talking about doing geography-specific conferences in the future. So like the model that we have this time around is a little bit cumbersome on behind the scenes for like people volunteering to host stuff all day. And we also realize that the time zone stuff is really kind of brutal for some people. So we've talked about doing like, I mean, we got the idea because of people in Australia and in Indonesia and New Zealand who are really suffering the most from the time zone difference, and doing an all Oceania version of the conference, probably during like my summer break, maybe this summer or next, where I have the freedom to stay up all night running stuff without having to go to campus, or I have 2 small kids, and so deal with like daycare and elementary school. We've talked about doing a Canadian one. I know that members of the Chilean Society of Criminology have submitted a few papers here, so we've talked about doing an all South America one. And then even just like in North America, going like state by state is like really the pie in the sky, getting legislators and activists on the ground in the US and Canada, state by state, province by province, I think would be really, really cool. So I was worried that people weren't going to come, and then we got our numbers yesterday and almost 700 unique visits, and I'm all in. So I am all about making everything free and accessible to people. And I didn't mean to soapbox right now, but I'm really, really excited to do this for everyone. So hopefully spread the word.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Well, good luck with the rest of the sessions.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Take care. Have a good day.
You
You too. Bye.